The blood pooled beneath Lillian Blackwood's lip as she stared defiantly at her husband, refusing to lower her gaze despite the stinging slap that had just silenced her words about women's suffrage. It was 1878 in the dusty town of Copper Creek, Arizona Territory, and a woman's opinion was worth less than the dirt beneath her husband's boots, especially when that opinion challenged a man's authority. "You'll learn to hold your tongue in public, Lillian," George Blackwood hissed, straightening his waistcoat as though he hadn't just struck his wife in full view of several townspeople who pretended not to notice. "No man wants a wife who embarrasses him with her foolish notions." Lillian dabbed the blood away with her handkerchief, her emerald eyes burning with unspoken fury. At 22, she had already spent 3 years in a marriage that had grown increasingly restrictive and violent. What had once seemed like a secure future with the son of a wealthy merchant had become a prison where her every thought was scrutinized and punished. "Yes, George," she whispered, the words tasting like poison on her tongue. That evening, as George slept soundly after consuming most of a bottle of whiskey, Lillian made the decision that had been forming in her mind for months. She packed a small bag with essentials, the meager savings she'd secretly tucked away from selling embroidery work, and slipped from the house that had never felt like home. The night air carried the scent of sage and desert dust as Lillian made her way to the stagecoach office. She had heard rumors of a women's aid society in Tucson, nearly 100 miles away. Perhaps there she could find shelter, work, and most importantly, freedom from George's fists. "One ticket on the morning stage to Tucson," she whispered to the sleepy-eyed station manager, a man who mercifully didn't recognize her in the dim lamplight. "That'll be $2, madam," he said, barely looking up from his ledger. As dawn broke over the mountains, Lillian boarded the stagecoach, her heart pounding with equal parts terror and exhilaration. She knew George would be furious upon discovering her absence, but for the first time in years, she felt the faintest glimmer of hope. The stagecoach rattled through the rugged terrain, each mile putting blessed distance between Lillian and her husband. Her fellow passengers, 2 elderly sisters traveling to visit a nephew, a traveling salesman with a case of patent medicines, and a quiet man with the weathered look of a rancher paid her little mind, which suited her perfectly. By midday, the coach stopped at a small way station for the passengers to stretch their legs and take refreshment. Lillian was sipping a cup of weak coffee when she heard a commotion outside. Her blood ran cold as she recognized George's voice. "My wife took the morning stage. I need to collect her and bring her home. It's a family matter," he explained to the station keeper with the practiced charm that had fooled so many in town. Lillian looked around desperately for an escape route. The back door of the station led to a small corral where several horses were hitched. Without thinking further, she slipped outside and untied one of the animals, a sturdy bay mare, and pulled herself into the saddle. Her mother had taught her to ride before she died, one of the few skills George hadn't managed to take from her. She urged the horse away from the station, taking a trail that veered away from the main road. She had no clear plan beyond getting away, though she knew taking the horse constituted theft. Better to face charges for theft than to return to George's care, she reasoned grimly. For hours, Lillian rode through increasingly wild country, the terrain growing more rugged as she pushed deeper into territory she didn't know. By late afternoon, exhaustion began to overtake her. The mare was tiring as well, and Lillian knew they both needed rest and water. In the distance, she spotted what appeared to be a small stream, and she guided the horse toward it. As they approached the water, the mare suddenly reared, nearly throwing Lillian from the saddle. A rattlesnake slithered away through the rocks, but the damage was done. The horse bolted, and Lillian, caught off guard, lost her grip on the reins. She tumbled from the saddle, landing hard on the rocky ground. Pain exploded through her ankle and side. She cried out, then bit back the sound, suddenly aware of how alone she was in this wilderness. The mare had run a short distance away and now stood nervously pawing the ground. "Come here, girl," Lillian called softly, trying to keep the pain from her voice. But when she attempted to stand, her ankle gave way beneath her. She fell back, tears of frustration and pain filling her eyes. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, fear crept through her. She had no food, no water, and now no means of travel. The desert night would turn cold, and she had heard stories of mountain lions and wolves that roamed these parts. For the first time, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake in fleeing. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her heart leap with both hope and dread. Had George somehow tracked her? Or was it someone who might help? Through the gathering dusk, a lone rider appeared. Tall and broad-shouldered, he sat easily in the saddle of a magnificent black stallion. As he drew closer, Lillian could make out the features of a man perhaps a few years older than herself, 30 at most, with sun-bronzed skin, dark hair beneath a wide-brimmed hat, and eyes the color of a summer sky. "You look like you're in a spot of trouble, madam," he said, dismounting and approaching her with caution, as though she were a spooked deer that might flee at any sudden movement. I fell," Lillian admitted, trying to mask the fear in her voice. A woman alone with a stranger in the wilderness had much to fear, but something in his gentle manner gave her a measure of comfort. "May I take a look at that ankle?" he asked, remaining at a respectful distance until she nodded her consent. He knelt beside her, his touch professional and impersonal as he examined her injury. "Sprained, not broken, I think, but you shouldn't be putting weight on it for a few days." He glanced at the bay mare, which had now calmed and was drinking from the stream. "That your horse?" Lillian hesitated, then decided honesty was her best course. "No, I borrowed her from the stage station when I saw my husband had followed me." The stranger's expression sharpened with interest. "Running from your husband, are you?" There was no judgment in his voice, merely curiosity. Lillian touched her split lip, which had begun to swell. "He doesn't approve of my opinions or my expressing them." Something dark flashed in the man's eyes as he noticed her injury for the first time. "I see," he said quietly. "Well, madam, my ranch is about an hour's ride from here. I can offer you shelter for the night, and tomorrow we can figure out what to do about your situation." He touched the brim of his hat. "Name's Daniel Prescott. Most folks just call me Dan." "Lillian Blackwood," she replied, then immediately regretted giving her real name, Mrs. Blackwood. "I promise you'll be safe at my place. I have a housekeeper, Mrs. Torres, who'll see to your comfort." He paused, then added with unexpected gentleness, "You can speak all you want there. No one's going to strike you for having thoughts of your own." Something in his words, the simple acknowledgement of her right to speak freely, broke through Lillian's careful composure. A sob escaped her before she could stop it. Daniel pretended not to notice her tears, busying himself with retrieving the bay mare. "Can you ride if I help you up? Or would it be easier if you rode with me?" "I can ride," Lillian said, drawing on her remaining reserves of strength. She would not show weakness, not when this stranger was offering her first taste of kindness in years. With Daniel's help, she remounted the mare, gritting her teeth against the pain in her ankle. He handed her the reins, then swung easily onto his own horse. "Follow me, Mrs. Blackwood. We'll have you someplace safe before full dark." As promised, they reached Daniel's ranch just as the last light faded from the sky. It was larger than Lillian had expected, a sprawling single-story structure built of adobe and timber, with several outbuildings and corrals visible in the moonlight. A warm glow spilled from the windows, and as they approached, the door opened to reveal a middle-aged Mexican woman with a stern but kind face. "Daniel, I was beginning to worry," the woman called, then stopped short at the sight of Lillian. "Quien es esta?" "Mrs. Blackwood needs our help, Mrs. Torres," Daniel explained, dismounting and coming to assist Lillian. "She's injured her ankle and needs a safe place to stay." Mrs. Torres's expression softened as she took in Lillian's disheveled appearance and bruised face. "Of course. Come in, Senora. I will prepare a room for you." Lillian found herself escorted into a surprisingly comfortable home. The main room was spacious, with a stone fireplace, solid wooden furniture, and colorful woven rugs covering the packed earth floor. Bookshelves lined one wall, an unexpected luxury in this remote place, and the scent of something savory cooking made her suddenly aware of her hunger. Mrs. Torres helped her to a chair near the fire and brought her a cup of water, which Lillian drank gratefully. "I'll stable the horses," Daniel said. "Mrs. Torres will help you get settled." True to his word, the housekeeper led Lillian to a small but clean bedroom where she helped her wash and provided a simple cotton nightgown. "It belonged to Daniel's sister when she visited last year, Mrs. Torres explained. "She is about your size, I think." "You're very kind," Lillian murmured, exhaustion beginning to overtake her now that she was safe. "The senor, he has a good heart," Mrs. Torres said simply. "Rest now, we will talk more in the morning." Lillian sank gratefully onto the bed, her mind whirling with questions about her unusual host. Despite her fatigue, she found herself staring at the ceiling, wondering what tomorrow would bring. She must have drifted off because she woke with a start to sunlight streaming through the window. For a moment, panic seized her as she tried to remember where she was. Then the events of the previous day came flooding back, along with the throbbing pain in her ankle. A knock at the door drew her attention. "Mrs. Blackwood, it's Daniel Prescott. Mrs. Torres has breakfast ready if you're feeling up to joining us." "Yes, thank you," she called, her voice still rough with sleep. "I'll be there shortly." Mrs. Torres had laid out a simple dress presumably also belonging to Daniel's sister and helped Lillian dress and bind her swollen ankle. With the housekeeper's support, she made her way to the dining room where Daniel was already seated at the table. He rose when she entered, a gesture of respect that took her by surprise. George had never shown such courtesy, even in the early days of their courtship. "How's the ankle this morning?" Daniel asked as Mrs. Torres helped Lillian into a chair. "Painful, but I'll manage," she replied, determined to show strength. "No need to rush your recovery," he said, passing her a plate of eggs and crisp bacon. "You're welcome to stay here until you're fully healed." Lillian set down her fork, meeting his gaze directly. "Why are you helping me? You don't know me. I stole a horse. I'm running from my husband, which makes me a woman with courage," Daniel interrupted gently. "And the horse can be returned with an explanation. As for your husband," his expression hardened. "No man has the right to strike his wife." "Many would disagree with you," Lillian said bitterly. "Many are wrong," he replied simply. "Where were you headed when I found you?" "Tucson." "I'd heard there's a women's aid society there." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "There is. My sister volunteers with them when she's in town." He hesitated, then added, "But if your husband is looking for you, that might be the first place he checks." Lillian's stomach twisted with renewed fear. "I hadn't thought of that." "You're welcome to stay here as long as you need," Daniel offered. "My ranch is remote enough that you'd be hard to find, and—" he smiled slightly. "I could use some help with the books. Mrs. Torres is a fine housekeeper, but numbers aren't her strong suit, and I spend too much time with the cattle to keep proper records." Lillian stared at him, wondering if this was some kind of trap. "You'd offer me employment if you're willing." "I noticed your fine penmanship when you signed the guest book last night." She flushed, both pleased at the compliment and surprised he'd noticed. "I was a schoolteacher before I married. George didn't approve of me working afterward." Daniel's expression darkened momentarily. "Well, I'd approve mightily of having someone with education help bring order to my accounts." He gestured toward the bookshelves she'd noticed the night before. "As you can see, I value learning, though I haven't had as much formal education as I might have liked." Mrs. Torres returned with coffee, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics: the spring calving, a new foal born the previous week, the prospects for rain. Lillian found herself relaxing in Daniel's company, his easy manner and genuine interest in her thoughts a balm to her wounded spirit. After breakfast, Daniel helped her to a comfortable chair on the covered porch, providing her with a book and promising to return by midday. "I need to check on the herd in the south pasture," he explained, "but Mrs. Torres will be here if you need anything." As he rode away, Lillian found herself watching his straight back and confident seat in the saddle with something like admiration. She had never met a man like Daniel Prescott, educated yet unpretentious, strong yet gentle. The days that followed established a comfortable routine. Lillian's ankle improved steadily, and true to his word, Daniel brought her his account books to organize. She discovered she had a talent for the work, finding satisfaction in bringing order to the chaotic records of the ranch's operations. Each evening, they would sit by the fire after supper, sometimes reading in companionable silence, other times engaged in conversations that ranged far beyond the day's tasks. Daniel, she learned, had inherited the ranch from an uncle 5 years earlier after serving briefly as a deputy marshal in Tucson. "I found I preferred the company of cattle to criminals," he explained with a wry smile, "though I still maintain my connections with the law in these parts." Useful for dealing with rustlers. Lillian, in turn, shared stories of her childhood in St. Louis, where her father had been a professor of literature before his death left her mother struggling to support them. "My mother taught me that a woman's mind was her greatest asset," she told Daniel one evening. "She would have been horrified to see me silenced as I was in my marriage." "She sounds like a wise woman," Daniel remarked. "You honor her by reclaiming your voice." 2 weeks passed in this manner, with Lillian growing stronger both physically and emotionally. The bruise on her face faded, and she found herself smiling more often, especially in Daniel's company. She discovered an unexpected peace in the rhythms of ranch life, in the vast openness of the land that surrounded them. One afternoon, as she sat on the porch working on the ledgers, she heard riders approaching. Fear immediately gripped her had George somehow found her. But when she looked up, she saw Daniel returning with 2 of his ranch hands, all of them laughing at some shared joke. The sight of him, wind-blown and sun-bronzed, sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. She quickly looked down at her work, unsettled by her reaction. Developing feelings for her rescuer would be foolish, she told herself sternly. Once her ankle was fully healed, she would need to move on, to build a new life for herself far from George's reach. Daniel dismounted and approached the porch, his smile warming as he spotted her. "How goes the battle with the numbers?" he asked, removing his hat and running a hand through his dark hair. "I believe I'm winning," Lillian replied, returning his smile despite her inner turmoil. "You've actually turned a profit for the past 3 quarters, though you might not have known it from the state of these books." "That's the best news I've had all week," he said, settling into the chair beside her. "Though I confess I'm not surprised. Cattle prices have been strong, and we've had fewer losses to predators this year." Their conversation was interrupted by Mrs. Torres, who emerged from the house with a tray of lemonade. "You work too hard, Señor," she scolded Daniel gently, "and you make the Señora work too hard as well." Daniel accepted a glass with a grateful nod. "Mrs. Blackwood is a miracle worker, Mrs. Torres. She's bringing order to chaos, and I'm deeply in her debt." Lillian felt a blush rising to her cheeks at his praise. Hardly a miracle, just basic arithmetic and a bit of organization. "Skills I sorely lack," he admitted with a self-deprecating laugh. "My uncle always said I could tell a prime steer at 50 paces, but couldn't add 2 and 2 if my life depended on it." As they enjoyed their lemonade, Daniel grew more serious. "I need to ride into town tomorrow for supplies. I was thinking you might want to come along, see the place. It's small, but they have a decent general store." He hesitated. "I thought perhaps you might want to select some fabric for new dresses. Mrs. Torres is quite skilled with a needle." Lillian set down her glass, surprised by the offer. "That's very generous, but I couldn't impose further. It's not an imposition," Daniel interrupted. "Consider it payment for your work with the books. You've more than earned it." The prospect of new clothing that wasn't borrowed and of venturing beyond the confines of the ranch was tempting. Yet fear still lingered. What if someone recognizes me? What if word gets back to George? Daniel's expression grew thoughtful. "Hollow Creek is 30 miles from where I found you, in the opposite direction from Copper Creek. The chances of anyone connecting you to your husband are slim." He paused, then added gently, "Besides, you can't stay hidden forever, Lillian." It was the first time he had used her given name, and something in the way he said it made her heart skip. "You're right," she admitted. "I would like to see the town." The following morning, Lillian dressed in the best of the borrowed clothes, a simple blue calico that Mrs. Torres had altered to fit her slender frame. Her ankle was nearly healed, though she still walked with a slight limp. Daniel had harnessed a team to a light wagon rather than riding horseback, explaining that it would be more comfortable for her and better for transporting supplies. The journey to Hollow Creek took most of the morning, with Daniel pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of the territory's history. Lillian found herself relaxing in his company, the fear that had been her constant companion for so long gradually easing. Hollow Creek proved to be little more than a wide spot in the road, a single dusty street lined with a general store, a saloon, a small church, and a handful of other businesses. Daniel helped Lillian down from the wagon in front of the general store, his hands strong and steady at her waist. "Mr. Prescott, good to see you," called the storekeeper, a balding man with spectacles perched on his nose. His curious gaze shifted to Lillian. "And who might this lovely lady be?" Daniel's hand came to rest protectively at the small of Lillian's back. "Mr. Peterson, may I present Mrs. Lillian Blackwood, a friend from back east who's staying at the ranch for a time." The introduction was smooth, revealing nothing of her true circumstances. "A pleasure, madam," Peterson said with a slight bow. "We don't get many visitors in these parts." "What brings you to our little corner of the territory?" Before Lillian could respond, Daniel interjected, "Mrs. Blackwood is recently widowed and needed a change of scenery. My sister suggested the dry air might be good for her constitution." The lie was delivered with such conviction that even Lillian almost believed it. Widowed. The word carried a weight of freedom she hadn't dared to imagine, to be permanently free of George, not just running from him. "My condolences, madam," Peterson said, his expression appropriately solemn. "Well, you'll find good people here, though we're a simple folk." "Thank you," Lillian managed, finding her voice. "Everyone has been most welcoming." As Daniel consulted his list of needed supplies, Lillian wandered through the store, running her fingers over bolts of fabric and examining jars of preserved goods. The simple pleasure of shopping something she'd once taken for granted now felt like a luxury. She selected a bolt of deep green cotton that would complement her eyes, and another of cream muslin for undergarments. Daniel insisted on adding a length of soft blue wool for when the weather turns cooler, and a paper of pins and needles. Their shopping completed, Daniel suggested lunch at the small hotel dining room before starting the journey back. As they crossed the street, a commotion from the direction of the saloon caught their attention. A man's angry shout was followed by the sound of breaking glass. The batwing doors of the saloon burst open, and a young woman stumbled out, her cheek reddened as if from a slap. A man followed, his face contorted with rage. "I told you to keep your mouth shut about politics in public," he snarled, grabbing her arm. "No man wants to hear a woman's opinion on territorial governance." Lillian froze, the scene horrifyingly familiar. Beside her, she felt Daniel tense. "That's Jacob Mills," he said quietly, "and his wife, Sarah. He's got a reputation for his temper." Before Lillian could respond, Daniel was striding toward the couple, his posture radiating controlled anger. She followed a few paces behind, drawn by a sense of kinship with the frightened woman. "Mills," Daniel called, his voice carrying the authority of his former position as deputy. "That's enough." Mills turned, his grip on his wife's arm not loosening. "This isn't your business, Prescott. This is between me and my wife. When you drag your private matters onto the public street, you make it everyone's business," Daniel replied evenly. "Let her go." A small crowd had begun to gather, watching the confrontation with wary interest. Mills glanced around, seeming to realize he was creating a spectacle. With obvious reluctance, he released his wife's arm. "She needs to learn her place," he muttered, but with less conviction. Her place is wherever she chooses to stand, Daniel said firmly, and she has the right to speak her mind without fear of your fists. Mills scowled but backed down under Daniel's steady gaze. Come on, Sarah, he growled. We're going home. Sarah Mills hesitated, her eyes darting between her husband and Daniel. Lillian stepped forward then, moving to stand beside the frightened woman. Perhaps Mrs. Mills would like to take refreshment at the hotel before leaving town, she suggested gently. The heat can be quite overwhelming this time of day. That's a fine idea, Daniel agreed immediately. In fact, Mrs. Mills, we'd be honored if you'd join us for lunch. I'm sure your husband has business to attend to. His tone made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. For a moment, Mills looked as though he might argue, but the watching crowd and Daniel's imposing presence dissuaded him. Fine, he spat. But be home before dark, Sarah, or there'll be hell to pay. As he stalked away, Sarah Mills let out a shaky breath. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. He doesn't. He's not always like this. The justification was so familiar that Lillian's heart ached. How many times had she made similar excuses for George's behavior? You don't need to explain, she said softly. I understand more than you might think. At the hotel dining room, over plates of surprisingly good beef stew and fresh bread, Sarah Mills gradually relaxed enough to speak more freely. She was younger than Lillian by a few years, barely 20, with the look of someone whose youth was being prematurely stolen. It was the new territorial voting proposal, she explained hesitantly. I merely mentioned that I thought women should have a say in governance, since the laws affect us too. She touched her reddened cheek self-consciously. Jacob said I was embarrassing him with my radical notions. There's nothing radical about wanting a voice in matters that concern you, Lillian said, her own passion on the subject rising. My mother taught me that silence in the face of injustice is complicity with that injustice. Sarah's eyes widened. Your husband allows you to speak so freely. Mr. Prescott isn't my husband, Lillian corrected gently, aware of Daniel listening quietly to their exchange. And even if he were, I would still speak my mind. A marriage should be a partnership, not a tyranny. That's not how Jacob sees it, Sarah murmured, looking down at her plate. Daniel spoke then, his voice gentle but firm. Mrs. Mills, if you ever need assistance, my ranch is always open to you, no questions asked. Sarah looked up, surprise and a flicker of hope crossing her face before doubt returned. I couldn't leave. Where would I go? What would I do? I have no family here, no means of support. There are women's aid societies in Tucson, Lillian told her. Places where you could find shelter and work until you can establish yourself. Or, Daniel added, as I said, my ranch is open to you. I employ several women in various capacities. Mrs. Torres runs my household, and Mrs. Blackwood here has been invaluable in organizing my accounts. Lillian felt a rush of gratitude for his ready inclusion of her in this offer of sanctuary, for treating her work as valuable rather than an imposition he was tolerating. Sarah Mills seemed to consider this information carefully, though she made no commitments. When lunch was concluded, Daniel escorted both women back to the general store, where Mills was waiting impatiently by his wagon. Remember what I said, Daniel told Sarah quietly as she prepared to leave. The offer stands any time. On the journey back to the ranch, Lillian was unusually quiet, reflecting on the encounter with Sarah Mills and the parallels to her own situation. You're thinking about her, aren't you? Daniel asked after several miles of silence. Yes, Lillian admitted, seeing her. It was like looking into a mirror of the past. That was me just weeks ago, making excuses for a man's cruelty, seeing no way out. But you found a way, Daniel reminded her. You had the courage to leave. Only because I reached a breaking point, Lillian said softly. And even then, if you hadn't found me. She shuddered at the memory of her vulnerability, alone in the wilderness. Daniel's hands tightened on the reins. I've never understood men who use their strength to dominate rather than protect. My father taught me that a man's true measure is in how he treats those who are vulnerable, not in how he exerts power over them. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was, Daniel said, a shadow crossing his face. He died defending a Chinese immigrant family from a mob during the riots in Los Angeles in '71. Taught me my final lesson about standing up for what's right, even when it's dangerous. Lillian studied his profile, seeing in his strong features the heritage of such moral courage. You honor him with your actions, she said softly. Their eyes met briefly, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. That evening, as Mrs. Torres helped Lillian cut the fabric for new garments, Lillian found herself reflecting on the day's events and her growing feelings for Daniel Prescott. It was foolish, she knew, to develop an attachment to him. Once her situation was resolved, once she was sure George had given up searching for her, she would need to move on, to build an independent life for herself. Yet as the days passed, that resolve weakened. Daniel never treated her as less than his equal, never dismissed her opinions or tried to silence her voice. Their conversations ranged from literature to politics to the practical matters of running the ranch, and he seemed genuinely interested in her perspectives. One evening, about a month after her arrival at the ranch, Lillian was reading on the porch when Daniel joined her, carrying 2 glasses of his prized Kentucky bourbon. A small indulgence, he said, offering her one of the glasses, to celebrate the completion of the spring roundup. Thanks in no small part to your organization of the crews and supplies. Lillian accepted the glass with a smile, pleasantly surprised by the acknowledgement. I merely put things in logical order. You and your men did the actual work. Don't diminish your contribution, Daniel said, settling into the chair beside her. The ranch has never run more smoothly. They sipped their bourbon in companionable silence for a few moments, watching as the sunset painted the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. I received a letter today, Daniel said eventually, from the marshal in Tucson. Lillian tensed immediately. About me, indirectly. He mentioned that a man named George Blackwood has been inquiring about a missing woman fitting your description. Daniel turned to face her, his expression serious. He's offering a substantial reward for information leading to your return. Fear clutched at Lillian's heart. He won't give up, will he? Men like that rarely do. Their pride won't allow it. Daniel hesitated, then added, the marshal is a friend. I've written to him explaining the circumstances without revealing your location. He's sympathetic. But legally, I'm still George's wife, Lillian said bitterly. The law gives him rights over me that no human being should have over another. Daniel set down his glass, his expression thoughtful. There might be a way to address that. Divorce? Lillian asked. It's nearly impossible for a woman to obtain one, especially on grounds of cruelty. I'd need witnesses' proof. Actually, I was thinking of something else, Daniel said, a strange nervousness entering his voice. Something that would give you immediate legal protection. Lillian looked at him questioningly. Marriage, he said simply. To me. The word hung in the air between them, startling in its directness. Daniel, hear me out, he said quickly. It would be a marriage in name only if that's what you prefer. But as my wife, you'd have the protection of my name and position in the territory. Blackwood would have no legal claim on you. Lillian stared at him, trying to process his suggestion. You would marry me simply to protect me from George. Not simply for that, Daniel admitted, his voice dropping lower. I've grown to care for you deeply, Lillian. These weeks with you have been the happiest I can remember. Your intelligence, your courage, your resilience. Everything about you has captured my heart. His confession left her speechless. She had been so careful to guard her own growing feelings, never imagining he might share them. I don't expect you to return my feelings, he continued when she didn't respond. And I would never presume to rush you after what you've been through. The arrangement could remain entirely proper for as long as you wished. Separate rooms, no, expectations. A flush darkened his cheeks. but it would give you the legal protection you need and time to decide what you truly want for your future. Lillian found her voice at last. Daniel, your offer is incredibly generous, but I can't accept it, not under these circumstances. You deserve to marry someone who comes to you freely, not someone who needs your name as a shield. I'm offering freely, he insisted. And I believe you deserve the chance to discover who you are and what you want without fear shadowing your every step. She rose from her chair, suddenly needing distance to think clearly. May I have some time? This isn't a decision to make lightly. Of course, Daniel said, standing as well. Take all the time you need. For the next several days, Lillian contemplated Daniel's proposal, weighing her options with care. She couldn't deny her growing feelings for him. His kindness, his respect for her mind and spirit, his quiet strength had all worked their way into her heart. Yet the shadow of her marriage to George made her hesitant to enter another, even one as unconventional as Daniel suggested. She was still deliberating when fate intervened in the form of Jacob Mills, who arrived at the ranch one afternoon in a state of barely controlled panic. Prescott. He called, riding up to the house at a dangerous pace. I need your help. Daniel emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a cloth. Mills, what's happened? It's Sarah, Mills said, dismounting with such haste he nearly fell. She's gone missing. Left a note saying she was going to Tucson, but she took the wrong trail. There's a band of Apache renegades reported in those hills. His voice cracked. I've been a fool, Prescott, a damned fool, if anything happens to her. Lillian had come onto the porch at the commotion, and she and Daniel exchanged a significant look. The timing was suspicious, Sarah Mills making her escape just days after they had mentioned the Women's Aid Society to her. When did she leave? Daniel asked, already moving toward the corral. This morning before dawn. I didn't find the note until I came in for dinner. Mills looked truly frightened now. I know what you must think of me after what happened in town, but I love her, Prescott. I never learned how to show it right. Daniel was already saddling his horse. We'll find her, Mills. But when we do, you need to understand that the decision to return must be hers. Mills nodded frantically. I know, I'll do better, I swear it. Lillian, Daniel called, would you ask Mrs. Torres to prepare some food for the trail and fetch my rifle from the gun cabinet? She nodded and hurried inside, her mind racing. Sarah Mills was out there somewhere, possibly in danger, all because she'd sought the same freedom Lillian had found. When she returned with the provisions and weapon, Daniel was giving instructions to Mills about the search pattern they would follow. You should stay here, he told Lillian quietly as she handed him the rifle. If she managed to find her way here looking for sanctuary, someone needs to be present. Be careful, Lillian said, unable to mask her concern. The Apache are mostly peaceful these days, Daniel finished for her. The renegade band is small and they generally avoid confrontation unless provoked, but I'll be cautious, I promise. He mounted his horse, then paused, looking down at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Lillian, when I return, I would very much like your answer. She nodded, understanding his meaning. You'll have it. As the men rode away, Lillian found herself praying not only for Sarah Mills's safety but for clarity in her own heart. Night fell with no sign of Daniel's return. Mrs. Torres prepared a simple supper, but Lillian found she had little appetite. She kept vigil on the porch, a lantern burning to guide any travelers to the ranch. It was nearly midnight when she heard the approach of horses. Lifting the lantern, she peered into the darkness, relief flooding through her as she made out Daniel's familiar silhouette. Behind him rode a second horse carrying what appeared to be two figures, one male, one female. As they drew closer, Lillian could see that the woman was indeed Sarah Mills, looking exhausted but unharmed. The man supporting her was not Jacob Mills, however, but a ranch hand Lillian recognized from her work with the accounts Miguel, one of Daniel's most trusted workers. Thank God, Lillian breathed as they dismounted. Sarah, are you all right? The young woman nodded wearily. Just tired, I got lost. The trails all looked the same after a while. She glanced up at Miguel with obvious gratitude. He found me just as it was getting dark. Where's Mills? Lillian asked Daniel quietly as Mrs. Torres took charge of getting Sarah inside. Daniel's expression was grim. We separated to cover more ground. He hasn't returned to our meeting point. He ran a hand through his hair, looking more troubled than Lillian had ever seen him. There were signs of Apache in the area where Miguel found Sarah. Fresh tracks. Fear clutched at Lillian's heart. You don't think? I don't know, Daniel admitted. I need to go back out at first light to look for him. He took her hands in his voice dropping to ensure they weren't overheard. Lillian, if something has happened to Mills, Sarah will need a safe place to stay. The law might try to place her with Mills's brother, who by all accounts is cut from the same cloth. She can stay here, Lillian said firmly, for as long as she needs. Daniel's smile was weary but warm. I knew you'd say that. He hesitated, then added, I should get some rest if I'm to head out again at dawn, but first, have you had time to consider my proposal? Lillian met his gaze steadily, having come to her decision during the long hours of waiting. Yes, she said softly, and my answer is yes, Daniel, I will marry you. Relief and joy transformed his tired features. Truly, you're certain? I am, she affirmed. These past weeks have shown me what a marriage of equals could be. You've never tried to silence me or dismiss my thoughts. You've treated me as a partner, not a possession. She took a deep breath. I can't promise that I'm completely healed from what George did to me. There may be difficulties. But I want to try with you. Daniel lifted her hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. That's all I ask, the chance to build something true together. The search for Jacob Mills resumed at dawn, with Daniel leading a larger party of ranch hands. Lillian remained at the ranch with Sarah and Mrs. Torres, helping the young woman regain her strength after her ordeal. I wasn't running away, Sarah confessed as they sat together in the kitchen. Not exactly. I just needed time to think away from Jacob. To decide if I could bear to stay or if I should leave for good. Lillian nodded, understanding perfectly. And what did you decide? Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I don't know, part of me loves him still. He wasn't always as he is now. When we first married, he was gentle, attentive. She twisted her wedding ring nervously. It was after his business failed that he changed, started drinking more, became angry at the smallest things. That doesn't excuse his behavior, Lillian said gently. No, Sarah agreed, but it helps me understand it. She looked up, her expression vulnerable. Do you think people can change, truly change? It was a question Lillian had asked herself many times regarding George. I believe they can, she said carefully, but only if they recognize their failings and genuinely wish to overcome them. And even then, it takes time and effort. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of horses approaching. Both women hurried to the porch, where they found Daniel and his men returning, their faces somber. In the midst of the group was a horse bearing a blanket-wrapped form secured to the saddle. Jacob, Sarah whispered, her face draining of color. Daniel dismounted quickly, coming to stand before her. I'm sorry, Mrs. Mills. We found him near the Apache crossing. It appears he was ambushed while searching for you. Sarah's knees gave way and Lillian caught her, supporting the younger woman as she absorbed the shocking news. He died trying to find me, Sarah said hollowly. To bring me home. He died trying to make amends, Daniel corrected gently. His last actions were those of a man who recognized his mistakes and wanted to set them right. In the days that followed, arrangements were made for Jacob Mills's burial in the small cemetery beside the Hollow Creek Church. As his widow, Sarah inherited his modest property, though the debts against it were substantial. Daniel quietly arranged to purchase the land at a fair price, allowing Sarah to clear the debts and have a small sum remaining for her future needs. You can stay here as long as you wish, Lillian told her after the funeral. Daniel and I would welcome your company especially. She hesitated, then decided to share their news, especially as we prepare for our own wedding. Sarah's eyes widened in surprise, then softened with genuine happiness. "Oh, Lillian, that's wonderful. When did this happen?" "Just before we learned of your husband's passing," Lillian explained. "We didn't want to announce it while you were in mourning." Sarah clasped Lillian's hands warmly. "Don't delay on my account. Life is too precious and too uncertain to postpone happiness." The wisdom in the younger woman's words struck Lillian forcefully. With Sarah's blessing, she and Daniel set a date for the following month, allowing time for Daniel's sister to travel from Tucson for the ceremony. As the wedding day approached, Lillian found herself reflecting on the extraordinary turn her life had taken in just a few months. From a captive in a marriage where her voice was silenced to a woman freely choosing a partnership with a man who valued her mind and spirit, the transformation seemed almost miraculous. Yet shadows still lingered. George Blackwood had not given up his search for his runaway wife, according to Daniel's sources in Tucson. And despite her growing love for Daniel, Lillian sometimes woke in the night, heart pounding from nightmares of George finding her, dragging her back to the prison of their marriage. Daniel never pressed her for more intimacy than she was ready to give, though they had shared several tender kisses as their wedding day drew nearer. His patience and understanding only deepened her feelings for him, even as she struggled with the lingering effects of George's abuse. The day before the wedding, Daniel's sister Alina arrived from Tucson, bringing with her a trunk of women's clothing donated by the Aid Society. "For you and Mrs. Mills," she explained as the women sorted through the garments. "Though I suspect you'll be needing a proper trousseau now, Lillian." Daniel Prescott was a vivacious woman of 30, unmarried and unapologetically independent. She worked as a journalist for the Tucson newspaper, reporting primarily on social issues, an unusual position for a woman, but one she had fought hard to secure. "Daniel's letters about you have been positively glowing," she told Lillian as they prepared for the small rehearsal dinner that evening. "I've never seen my brother so smitten." Lillian blushed, both pleased and embarrassed by the observation. "He saved my life in more ways than one." "And from what he tells me, you've brought new purpose to his," Alina replied with a knowing smile. "You're good for each other." The rehearsal dinner was a small affair, attended only by Daniel's sister, Sarah Mills, Mrs. Torres, and her husband, who worked on a neighboring ranch, and the local pastor who would perform the ceremony. The mood was festive, with good food and wine loosening tongues and prompting stories of Daniel's youth that had Lillian laughing until tears came to her eyes. As the evening concluded, Alina drew Lillian aside for a private word. "I've brought something for you," she said, pressing a small book into Lillian's hands. "Consider it an early wedding gift." Lillian glanced down at the volume, her eyes widening as she read the title, Women's Rights and Suffrage, A Practical Guide to Advocacy. "Alina, this is contraband in some circles," Daniel's sister finished with a mischievous smile, "but I thought you might find it inspiring." "Daniel mentioned your interest in women's rights." "Thank you," Lillian said sincerely. "It means a great deal to know I'm not alone in my beliefs." "You're far from alone," Alina assured her. "There's a growing movement across the country. Perhaps someday, when you're settled, you might consider joining our advocacy work in Tucson." The possibility of being part of something larger than herself, of fighting for change that would benefit all women, sent a thrill of excitement through Lillian. "I'd like that very much." The wedding day dawned clear and bright, with a gentle breeze tempering the desert heat. Lillian wore a simple gown of ivory silk that Alina had brought from Tucson, another contribution from Our Lady's Society, though this one specifically for you, she had explained. Sarah helped arrange Lillian's hair, weaving desert wildflowers into the auburn waves. "You look beautiful," she said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. "Daniel won't be able to take his eyes off you." "I'm nervous," Lillian admitted, smoothing the front of her gown. "Not about marrying Daniel, but about being a wife again," Sarah finished for her, understanding in her eyes. "It's natural after what you experienced with your first husband, but Daniel is nothing like George Blackwood." "I know," Lillian said softly. "In my mind, I know that. But sometimes my heart still fears." Then give it time, Sarah advised. Daniel strikes me as a patient man. The ceremony was held on the ranch beneath a canopy of cottonwood trees near the stream. The pastor from Hollow Creek officiated, his words simple but meaningful as Daniel and Lillian exchanged vows. I promise to honor your voice, your mind, and your spirit, Daniel added to the traditional promises. To stand beside you, not above you, as we build our life together. Tears welled in Lillian's eyes at the personalized vow. And I promise to trust in your goodness, she responded, to share my thoughts freely, and to be your true partner in all things. The small gathering of friends applauded as Daniel sealed their union with a kiss that was both tender and reverent. The celebration that followed was joyful, with food prepared by Mrs. Torres and music provided by several of the ranch hands who proved surprisingly talented with fiddle and guitar. As twilight descended, lanterns were lit around the yard, casting a warm glow over the festivities. Daniel found Lillian sitting apart from the others, watching the dancers with a contented smile. "Happy, Mrs. Prescott?" he asked, taking the seat beside her. The new name sent a shiver of pleasure through her. "Very," she assured him, reaching for his hand, "though it still seems almost like a dream. If it is a dream, I hope we never wake," he replied, raising her hand to his lips. "Would you care to dance?" They joined the others in a lively reel, and Lillian found herself laughing as Daniel twirled her around the makeshift dance floor. The shadows that had haunted her seemed to recede in the face of such simple joy. As the evening grew late, the guests gradually departed, offering final congratulations and well wishes. Alina embraced Lillian warmly before retiring to the guest room. "Welcome to the family, sister," she whispered. "You're exactly what Daniel needed." Finally, only the newlyweds remained beneath the lantern light. Daniel took Lillian's hand, his expression suddenly serious. "I meant what I said earlier about honoring your needs, if you prefer separate rooms tonight." Lillian's heart swelled with love for this man who continued to put her comfort above his own desires. "I don't want separate rooms," she said softly. "I want to be your wife in every sense, Daniel. I trust you." The look of joy that illuminated his features was worth any lingering trepidation she might have felt. Hand in hand, they walked to the main house, now truly their home. The weeks that followed were a time of adjustment and discovery for the newlyweds. Daniel's patience and tenderness gradually helped Lillian overcome the fears that George's abuse had instilled in her. She learned that physical intimacy could be a source of joy and connection rather than domination, that a man's touch could be gentle rather than controlling. In turn, Daniel found in Lillian not just a wife but a true partner in running the ranch. Her organizational skills and quick mind proved invaluable as they worked together to expand the operation, purchasing the adjoining Mills property and increasing their cattle holdings. Sarah Mills remained at the ranch, taking on the role of assistant to Mrs. Torres in household management. The young widow slowly recovered from her traumatic experiences, finding purpose in work and friendship with Lillian and Alina, who extended her stay to help with the transition. "I'm thinking of returning to teaching," Sarah confided to Lillian one afternoon as they worked together in the kitchen garden. "There's talk of opening a school in Hollow Creek, and the pastor mentioned they're seeking a teacher." "That's wonderful," Lillian exclaimed. "You'd be perfect for the position." Sarah smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes, something that had been rare in the early days after Jacob's death. "I need to build my own life now. You've shown me that it's possible." Alina, overhearing the conversation as she joined them in the garden, nodded approvingly. "The world is changing, slowly but surely. Women like us need to be at the forefront of that change." Their peaceful existence was interrupted one crisp autumn morning when a rider approached the ranch at a gallop. Daniel was out checking the herds, and Lillian stepped onto the porch, shielding her eyes against the sun to identify the visitor. Her blood ran cold as she recognized the figure astride the horse. George Blackwood had found her at last. "Lillian, he called as he dismounted, his voice carrying the false charm she remembered so well. "My darling wife, I've been searching everywhere for you." She stood frozen on the porch, fear warring with a new sense of determination. She was not the same woman who had fled from him months ago. She had found her strength, her voice, and most importantly, her legal protection as Daniel Prescott's wife. "I am no longer your wife, George," she said clearly, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I am married to Daniel Prescott legally and properly." George's charming facade slipped, revealing the anger beneath. "That's impossible. Our marriage was never dissolved." "It was," Alina said, stepping out of the house to stand beside Lillian. "I filed the papers myself in Tucson on grounds of abandonment and cruelty. The territorial judge granted the decree last month." This was news to Lillian, who turned to Alina in surprise. "Daniel wanted to be certain there could be no legal challenge to your marriage," Alina explained quietly. "We kept it from you to avoid causing you further distress. The judge was sympathetic to your situation." George's face contorted with rage. "You had no right. She is my property." "I am no one's property," Lillian declared, her voice rising with conviction. "I am a free woman who has chosen her own path." "We'll see about that," George snarled, taking a menacing step forward. "I've come to take you home, Lillian, and home you will go by force if necessary." He reached for her arm, but before he could touch her, the distinctive sound of a rifle being cocked froze him in place. "That would be most unwise, Mr. Blackwood," said Sarah Mills, who had emerged from the house with Daniel's hunting rifle in her steady hands. "Mrs. Prescott has made her position clear." George glanced between the women, momentarily taken aback by the unexpected resistance. "This is absurd. You can't mean to shoot me." "Only if you force the issue," Sarah replied calmly. "Please return to your horse and leave this property." The standoff might have escalated further had Daniel not returned at that moment, riding in from the south pasture with two of his men. Taking in the scene with a glance, he dismounted and approached, his expression dangerously controlled. "Blackwood," he said evenly. "You're trespassing on my land and threatening my wife." George turned to face him, visibly reassessing the situation now that he was outnumbered. "She was my wife first, Prescott. I have rights." "You forfeited those rights when you raised your hand to her," Daniel replied, his voice hard as steel. "The divorce is legal and binding. Lillian is now my wife, and this is her home." George looked from Daniel to Lillian, then to the rifle still trained on him by Sarah. His shoulders slumped slightly as he realized he would not prevail here. "This isn't over," he muttered, but the threat sounded hollow even to his own ears. "It is," Daniel contradicted him. "And to ensure there's no misunderstanding, I'll be writing to the territorial marshal about your harassment. Any further attempts to contact my wife will result in legal action." Defeated but still seething, George returned to his horse and mounted. "You'll regret this, Lillian," he called as he prepared to ride away. "No decent society will accept a woman who abandons her husband. I'd rather live honestly outside of decent society than suffer abuse within it," Lillian replied, standing tall beside Daniel. "Goodbye, George." They watched in silence as he rode away, dust billowing behind his horse. Only when he was well out of sight did Lillian allow herself to tremble, the full impact of the confrontation hitting her. Daniel wrapped an arm around her shoulders, drawing her close. "You were magnificent," he murmured against her hair. "We all were," Lillian corrected, reaching out to include Sarah and Alina in her gratitude. "I never imagined I could stand up to him like that." "I never doubted you for a moment," Daniel said, pride evident in his voice. That evening, as the household settled back into its normal rhythms, Lillian sat with Daniel on their porch, watching the stars emerge in the vast desert sky. "Alina told me about the divorce," she said quietly. "Why didn't you tell me?" Daniel took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle patterns on her palm. "I didn't want to reopen wounds that were beginning to heal, and I was afraid that news of legal proceedings might reach Blackwood and lead him to us before everything was finalized." Lillian considered this, then nodded slowly. I understand your reasoning, though in the future I would prefer you not keep such matters from me, even to protect me. Duly noted, Mrs. Prescott, he said with a smile. No more well-intentioned secrets. She leaned against his shoulder, feeling a sense of peace that had been growing steadily since their wedding day. Do you think he'll come back? I doubt it, Daniel replied. Men like Blackwood are bullies at heart. Once firmly stood up to, they usually slink away to find easier targets. He pressed a kiss to her temple. But if he does return, we'll face him together. You're not alone anymore, Lillian. No, she agreed softly. I'm not alone. As winter yielded to spring, life at the Prescott Ranch settled into a pleasant rhythm. Sarah Mills accepted the teaching position in Hollow Creek, riding to the small town each morning and returning in the afternoon. Alina reluctantly returned to Tucson, but promised frequent visits and continued to correspond regularly with Lillian about women's advocacy work. In late April, Lillian made a discovery that brought her both joy and trepidation. She was expecting a child. When she shared the news with Daniel, his expression of wonder and happiness dispelled any lingering fears she might have harbored. A baby, he breathed, placing a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. Our child. Lillian covered his hand with her own. Are you pleased? Beyond measure, he assured her, gathering her close. Though I confess the prospect of fatherhood is somewhat terrifying. She laughed softly, recognizing the same mix of emotions that swirled within her own heart. We'll learn together, as we've done with everything else. The months of her pregnancy passed peacefully, with Daniel hovering attentively and Mrs. Torres fussing over Lillian's diet and rest. Sarah proved an unexpected ally, having helped deliver several babies during her brief marriage, and offered practical advice that the books Alina sent from Tucson didn't cover. In early December, with snow dusting the distant mountains, Lillian gave birth to a daughter they named Margaret Alina, honoring both their mothers. The infant had Daniel's dark hair and Lillian's green eyes, a perfect blending of their features that seemed to symbolize their union. She's beautiful, Daniel whispered, cradling his daughter with a tenderness that brought tears to Lillian's eyes. Like her mother. And strong-willed, I suspect, like her father, Lillian replied with a tired smile. I hope she'll grow up in a world where her voice matters. Daniel looked up from the infant's face, his expression serious. She will if we have anything to say about it, and knowing you, my love, you'll have quite a lot to say. Lillian laughed, the sound full of joy and promise. Indeed I will, and you'll listen. Always, he promised, bending to kiss her forehead. Your voice is the sweetest sound in my world. As twilight fell over the ranch, painting the desert in shades of purple and gold, the small family remained together in the quiet of their bedroom. Outside, life continued cattle load in the distant fields. Ranch hands prepared for the evening meal. Sarah marked her students' lessons at the kitchen table. But within the circle of their embrace, Lillian and Daniel created a sanctuary of love and respect, a place where voices were heard and valued, where a woman could speak her mind freely and find not punishment but understanding. For Lillian, who had once been silenced with cruel blows, this was the greatest gift of all, the freedom to be herself, to speak her truth, to raise her daughter to do the same. In Daniel's arms, with their child between them, she had found not just safety but true partnership, a love built on mutual respect and shared dreams. What are you thinking? Daniel asked softly, noticing her contemplative expression. I'm thinking about how far I've come, she replied. From a woman who feared speaking her mind to one who knows her words have value, Daniel smiled, his love for her evident in every line of his face. They always had value, Lillian. You just needed someone who understood that. And I found him, she said, reaching up to touch his cheek. A man who said you can speak all you want here and meant it with his whole heart. As little Margaret slept peacefully between them, Lillian and Daniel sealed their happiness with a gentle kiss, their future stretching before them like the vast Arizona sky, limitless, bright, and full of promise.